Evening, everybody.
You're muffled, Tony.
Yeah.
I am muffled, huh?
Yeah.
Was I muffled before?
No.
Nope.
Oh, that's very curious. Right. All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, fine.
Okay,
Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Technology, isn't it wonderful?
Yeah.
The first pair had a real serious problem. Nobody could hear me. And consequently, I called and had them replace it, but they said you can't send it back because my guess is the shipping is as much as the things are worth.
Mhm.
Which really is a pain in the neck, given the fact that I spent $70 on them.
Oh.
Hello, Charlie. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Sergeant Timmy.
Hey, Terry.
Good evening.
Hey, Jennifer. Hello, Sergeant Timmy. Hello, Peter. Hello, Ryan. Hey, Sam. Mike.
Hello. We missing 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Where's
5,
David?
7.
There he is. Hey, David.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We missing 1, 2, 3, 4.
We're all here. All right, it's 7 o'clock, and are we being recorded, Ryan? Somebody needs to turn off
Charlie, can you mute?
Working on it.
All right, we're now being recorded. Okay,
Correct.
I'm going to call to order the February 8th, 2021 meeting of the Mansfield Town Council. The first item of business is the roll call. Ms. Chang, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Osberger.
Charlie, could you just wave? There we go. He's here.
Great. Berthelot.
Here.
Bruder.
Here.
Bertoni.
Here.
Freudman.
Here.
Kotchenberger.
Here.
Moran.
Here.
Sharon.
Here.
Shaken.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, somebody has another device going because we can hear echo. So if you would shut off your phones. I just lost the agenda. There we go. All right, the next item of business is the approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Moved by Ms. Berthelot. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Bruder, whose hand I saw first. Any comments, corrections, additions to the minutes? All right, is there anybody who wishes to abstain from these minutes? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in opposition? Then I declare that the motion to adopt the minutes has been passed unanimously. If we had a consent agenda, that would have been an ideal thing to go on it if no member objected. Okay, next is an opportunity for the public to address the council. Mr. Aylesworth, is there any member of the public to address the council?
We received no requests for a member of the public to address the council.
All right, thank you. Then it's up to you. It's for your town manager's report, which we have received by email in the last day or so.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll talk a fair bit about the COVID-19 response and some new efforts that we've put in place in the last day or so to increase our outreach to members of the community 75 years of age and older. So all I'll simply say now, and it was detailed a bit more in your packet or in my report, that additional staff resources and personnel are being made available to basically pull out every stop to reach out to folks through cold calling, using voter registration or resident information from voter registration lists. The town clerk very kindly helped us gain access to, and I'm hoping that we can continue to make positive headway in the coming days. But we'll have more details on exactly what's in place when Rob gives his report. On January 28th, myself and the mayor participated in a virtual meeting with state representatives Haddad, Smith, and Senator Flexer to discuss state biennial budget, as well as issues facing the town and how our state legislators might be able to collaborate with local officials to address issues of mutual interest. This included the pilot program and current funding formulas being used to determine a given municipalities' pilot allocation, microbrewery legislation, which I believe has come up before that you're all familiar with, absentee voting procedures, and legal notice requirements as it pertains to traditional or conventional print newspapers. A couple days later, the mayor and myself participated in the annual Friends of Agriculture event. This is usually an in-person breakfast. It was held virtually this year. It's hosted every year by the Tolland County Farm Bureau. Speakers included Congressman Joe Courtney, U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Connecticut Department of Agriculture Commission Brian Hurlbert, members of the state's state legislative delegation, and a wide range of individuals affiliated with agriculture in either a public policy or a business capacity. Really enjoyed that meeting. Obviously, agriculture is very important to Mansfield as a community, both in terms of its past heritage as well as its present and its future. And it was great to get connected with a number of those stakeholders. And I believe in the coming weeks, we'll be putting together, arranging for a tour of Mountain Dairy, Stearns Family Farm. And I look forward to seeing that in person for the first time. I know my family has been an avid consumer of Mountain Dairy products since we moved here. It really is probably the best tasting milk on earth. And so I look forward to getting a behind the scenes tour. I'm sure each of you have seen that facility, but I look forward to seeing it for the first time. The application period for the permanent fire chief position, you'll all recall this was a re-advertised vacancy when we had a search in the fall that didn't yield the right individual. That re-advertised or that new application window has just closed. It closed last Friday. We received applications from 16 qualified individuals. We're putting together a community, if you will, community panel that'll be comprised of both current and past fire chiefs of neighboring communities who have technical expertise that they can bring to the discussion, as well as town staff, including HR personnel, as you'd expect. And we'll have a member of the town's fire department command staff also represented on that initial screening panel. So looking forward to continuing to move forward with that. Obviously, the town has been without a permanent fire chief for about a month. Our acting fire chief, Chief Franklin's been doing a commendable job, but we look forward to moving closer to hopefully having a new permanent chief identified and in place by the spring. The FY 21-22 budget development process continues to progress according to the roadmap that we laid out or have utilized in past years and laid out again at the beginning of this season. At this point, the finance director and myself have met with all department heads to do at least an initial pass through their budget requests. There are still some items, both on the expenditure and the revenue side, that we have to plug before we have really a known working bottom line, if you will. But we're right on track where we would be in a typical year, and certainly on track, at least as I see it, for my recommendations, the town manager's budget recommendations to the council in late March. The inaugural issue of the new electronic newsletter, this will come out roughly bi-monthly. There may be occasions where there are special issues that come out in off months, but the inaugural issue was published last week. It was delayed a couple days because of the snow. We figured people might be a little distracted digging out their driveways and shoveling off their steps. So we published that, I believe, on Wednesday the 3rd. So a couple days later than was originally intended. Early feedback is favorable. It's a small sample size, but we have gotten some positive feedback from members of the community. Again, all positive. Couple constructive criticisms in terms of ways the information might be packaged or presented in a way that makes it that much more useful. But in terms of the concept and what we're trying to accomplish, all very, very positive comments and feedback. And for that, I'm thankful, and we'll of course try to incorporate any feedback to make adjustments to make that publication as valuable and as useful as possible to residents of the community. And this goes hand in glove with other upgrades we have planned and we're envisioning for communications products, including the town's website and our ongoing efforts to improve our social media communication. On the 15th of this month, the town of Mansfield will start accepting applications for emergency child care assistance from residents who have been financially impacted by the pandemic. As a reminder, this program is being financially supported by a $500,000 Small Cities grant that the town recently received. We actually had an internal meeting today to go over more of the, the internal mechanics and application sort of procedures. And very much looking forward to having this program go live in just a week. Members of the community, I think, are very anxious to take advantage of this program, especially working mothers, single mothers, who obviously haven't been able to, in many cases, return to their jobs because of lack of either childcare options or financial hardship that's getting in the way of them utilizing childcare options. So we believe this will be a real community benefit. The Parks and Recreation Director has been taking part in meetings with myself and the superintendents from both Mansfield Public Schools and Region 19, as well as the Region 19 Athletic Director, DPW Grounds Division staff, representatives from Mansfield Little League and other pertinent stakeholders to explore alternative fields that can be utilized by both Little League baseball and softball and the Region 19 high school varsity softball team, while ball field C, which is located at Southeast Elementary School, while that ball field is out of commission during construction of the new elementary school. We're leaving no stone unturned, trying to examine a variety of different options and zero in on the solution. I think we're doing a commendable job of getting all different perspectives, key stakeholder perspectives, brought into that conversation. Our library continues to get positive feedback about its browsing appointments, 30-minute browsing appointments that it launched in recent weeks. And those continue to be booked, fully booked on a daily basis. So the demand, the actual demand seems to be lining up with projected demand. And the library also launched a survey among residents on Saturday to obtain input to help guide the initial steps of a strategic planning process that it has begun. From the town clerk's office, Governor Lamont issued executive order number 10 on the 4th of this month, allowing any voter to request an absentee ballot for reasons of COVID-19 for any special election or municipal primary held before April 20th of this year. Town clerks administering the absentee ballot program during such an election or primary must use ballot package material specific to the executive order. The order does not apply to local referenda. And then maybe the last thing to touch on is we've obviously had a few different winter storm events. I think 3 winter storm events with a 4th one on the way since the last council meeting. And obviously that has an impact both in terms of, well, budgetary impact in terms of material and overtime. But our Department of Public Works continues to rise to the occasion and get the job done. And, you know, coming to the state from New Hampshire, where winter storms are certainly nothing unusual, my observation is that our crews are doing a really good job with some pretty significant events, and happy to see that. They could definitely hold their own in a New Hampshire winter, I think. So that's all of my oral report. Everything else is in your written report. Happy to field any questions.
Ms. Berthelot.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Ellsworth. Wonderful report. So many great things happening here in Mansfield. I am so super excited about the $500,000 CDBG grant. I think that's going to make a major difference in the lives of many people in our community. My question is, how are we pushing it out? What are we doing to make sure that we're reaching the people that it's intended to help?
So I think in the next couple of days, we're going to be pushing out using the same distribution list that we used for the newsletter. And while it was referenced in the newsletter, a separate standalone announcement. There's already an active web link, so we'll be linking to that, but just putting out something on a standalone basis to make sure that you know, more attention is drawn to it. If you have any other ideas, and then when I say, you know, as many venues as possible, that obviously includes social media. But we're open to any and all suggestions people have to help get the word out. I think the schools will be one of the ways that we're able to get the word out effectively. And very much appreciate the school this past week helping us get the word out on the newsletter to its distribution list.
I'm guessing Mansfield Advocates for Children is probably already involved, but they certainly are well versed in the community and reaching out for families and children.
I'm making note of that. Thank you.
Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. I would add to that and to the conversation I think we'll likely have around the outreach that the town is undertaking around the vaccination program to add to that list, working with some of the social service agencies locally in the area who might be engaged with families who would be eligible to participate in this program otherwise for other purposes, to make sure that folks are aware that this program is out there, and folks who might, you know, be helping with case management or whatever can help people navigate the application process. But I agree with Councilor Berthelot. It's great news. I'm really glad we have it.
And I should have mentioned, and thanks for putting a finer point on that. One of the ways we distributed the newsletter was through the various mailing lists that Human Services has, which goes directly to social service agencies. So when I made the comment made earlier about all the same, it would include those, but I probably should have emphasized that with what I said. So thank you.
This is available only to residents of Mansfield. Is that correct? It would not be available to somebody who works in Mansfield.
At this time, that's correct. We believe that the state, you know, as things play out, I mean, the reality is $500,000 is you know, it's a good sum of money, but the reality is we shouldn't kid ourselves that I think we won't have any trouble expending that. I think, you know, when you consider that the cost of childcare, and you consider the fact that I think the maximum stipend is somewhere in the neighborhood of $9,000 a family can receive. You know, it's going to be dozens of families we're able to help, not hundreds. And so I think if we run into any snags, if for one reason or another, demand or interest within or among Mansfield residents, isn't what we think it will be. There's a receptivity, I believe, from the state to broaden the target audience or the eligible, the folks that would be eligible. But right now, yes, targeted at Mansfield residents and only available to Mansfield residents.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of the town manager? All right, thank you. Then we'll move on to reports and comments of council members. There have been a number of deaths in Mansfield or involving Mansfield families, and I would like to extend our condolences to the family of Fran Seacand, who was a member of this council from 1977 to 85. And she passed this past week. I would also like to extend condolences to Rudy Fedretti and his family on the loss of their son, and to Lee and Tom Burns on the loss of Lee's son, Jim. And perhaps in honor of all of those, we should take a moment of silence. So let's have a moment of silence. Thank you. As you may have noticed, our 100-year-old historian will be celebrating her birthday on Valentine's Day, and she is still with us. Okay, any other members of the council wish to have reports or comments? Mr. Freudman.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Again, this is a kind of a follow-up, hopefully for the last time, to a report I gave last week where I expressed quite bitter feelings about not being allowed to speak at the Personnel Committee meeting. And I did call the mayor, and I feel that I should share some details of that phone conversation. It is, after all, town business. This call was on February 1st, 1 week ago. First of all, the mayor said that Councilor Berthelot was within her rights not to allow me to speak to an agenda item. She said something about Robert's rules allows that. We've never done it that way. Maybe that's a rule that applies to very large assemblies. I can't imagine individual members of the General Assembly presenting their own budget when you have a budget that's about to be presented that people in different committees have worked months on and involve hundreds or thousands of, or maybe thousands of pages. But, we've never done that. We've always had good, robust conversation. In fact, if I recall, Councilor Shuren spoke just before me, not just for questions for staff, but may have thrown in a few comments. When I wanted to speak, Councilor Berthelot said, no, only if you have a question for staff, nothing else. I brought that up. The mayor upheld it when I spoke to her. We covered a few other things. I'm just going to mention one because I was very surprised by it and I have to share it. I asked the mayor about the December 14th meeting of the town council, and there was agenda item 8C, which it involved a contract between the E.O. Smith Board of Education and the Teachers Association. And there was a state statute that said they should have notified us and set up a joint meeting before negotiations started, and they didn't do that. So since I think we should follow state statute, I asked the superintendent one question. I said, why didn't you follow the statute? At that event, at the December 14th, 2020 meeting, the mayor interrupted me. That's not a good thing to interrupt a member. And she said that the question was personal and would be ruled out of order. None of my council colleagues here need a reminder that the town council rules of procedure define personal as impugning one's character or integrity. So I asked the mayor, that was a performance-based question. How was it personal? The mayor responded with the following. She said, and I quote, "It was your tone." So I want to express my chagrin that now we have a new standard. The mayor, I respectfully suggest, has aggrandized a new type of power where she can decide whether a council member's tone or timbre or pitch or modulation of voice can be deemed as not passing muster based on her assessment at the moment. Folks, this is not fair, okay? So in summary, I don't want to belabor this. We have a long agenda. There are 4 issues. Some we touched on in our phone call. Others I've brought up in the past. Others were eloquently addressed by Councillor Osberger back on November 23rd. But here's where I see 4 problems. I believe, number 1, I believe that Robert's Rules of Order and Town Council Rules of Procedure are often violated. I've been interrupted many times, which was not proper. Also, there have been cases where I've been called out of order, which can happen even if I think it's unfair, but then the floor was taken from me. That's not proper either. You can caution a member, say the point of order is you're off topic. Okay, stay on the topic, proceed. So these are problems. That's number 1, violating rules of procedure and Robert's rules. Second is reinterpretations of rules of procedure or Robert's rules. There are a couple of examples, and I could just think of one at the moment where, for example, a motion to renew was confounded with a motion to reconsider. It's true we have a rule. You don't bring up the same motion in the same meeting if you just lost. But under Robert's rule, that would be a motion to reconsider. But to bring up a motion 7 months later, when an item is on the agenda again and conditions have changed, in this case for the worse, that was about the community center, then of course you can do it. That's called a motion to renew. And so it was wrong not to allow that motion to be made. A third problem I see is, you just apply new rules on the spot. And I felt that's what's going on at the Personnel Committee when Councillor Berthelot would let me speak to an agenda item. It's never happened before. I've never seen that at any meeting. And fourth is the one I just mentioned from my phone conversation with the mayor about coming up with this new thing where your tone will be judged as whether you may continue to speak. It's never in the rules. It's not in the rules of procedure. And of course, it's not in Robert's rules. These are just the 4 areas I can think of that I feel that the minority party is being treated very unfairly. You have shut us down. You have backed us into a corner. And really, we have no power to do anything about it. I humbly suggest to the mayor and also to Councillor Berthelot that it's not easy, perhaps, if you're a member of a party and you are part of a bloc and you feel the same way your fellow caucus members feel, and you're having to switch hats back and forth in every meeting between that role and also the role of being a totally unbiased moderator. And that is maybe not everybody is temperamentally suited to that dual role in a meeting. And I'll just finish by saying, we ask you again, try to be unbiased in the way the meetings are being run. That's my comment. Thank you.
Mr. Freudman, I would assure you that if a member of the Democratic Party had spoken in using the tone that you used to the superintendent of schools, I would have ruled identically. Ms. Berthelot.
What was my tone? What was my tone there?
I'm not going to get into and argue with you. I merely said if a Democrat had spoken the same way, I would have ruled the same. And in fact, our rules of procedure talk about civil discourse, which is tone. Ms. Berthelot.
It was civil.
I believe I have the floor now. Thank you, Mr. Freudman.
You always have the floor.
I will feel the need to make sure to clarify. I feel like maybe Mr. Freudman's, some of what you said don't comport with what happened at the meeting with the superintendent. As I recall, you in fact your tone was not necessarily the problem, though that may be Ms. Moran's memory. But I recall very clearly that you called her out as an educator and suggested very strongly that she was disregarding the law intentionally and potentially teaching students to disregard the law. And at the time, I was appalled and was so very thankful for the mayor to step in, and because we had a guest, and when we have guests, we need to speak to them respectfully. Now, we may disagree with them, but to call somebody out and to suggest in any way that they're intentionally not following the law is really grossly in conflict with our rules for decorum. So I respectfully disagree with what you have suggested happened. And I also want to go out of my way that I find the mayor very, very patient and does a wonderful job, and that we all understand that somebody has to be in charge, and she has been nominated to be so, and we need to respect her decisions, even as they often do when they go against us. And she certainly ruled against me, and when that happens, then I must respect her rulings. And then I think we all know that as adults, that is our role here too. When decisions are made, like Robert's rule says, is that we follow the decision made. We can appeal it, there isn't a process, but that is the process, not speaking over her and waiting until we have the floor to speak.
Mayor, you're muted.
Tony, you're muted. Tony, we can't hear you. Tony, you're muted. We couldn't hear any of that.
I'm going to allow each member of the council to speak first before I call on somebody for the second time. Mr. Alsberger.
Yes, with regards to Mr. Freudman's and Ms. Berthelot's comments, I did, of course, witness, or rather watch both the meeting that Mr. Freudman attended, and I also would have to comment on performance. We pay these people in our town a considerable amount of money to be competent, to know what they're doing. They have a long history of knowing their jobs, and I can just tell you from my own experiences in both management and owning a business that if someone's not doing the job, the first thing I would go up to them and say is, what are we paying you for? I'm sorry. I think that someone needs to be on top of what they're doing, on top of their game. And it's why we as I recall the phraseology, we hire the brightest and the best. Well, hiring the brightest and the best in this town, we expect high standards from them. We expect them to not make mistakes. We expect them to be held to a high degree. It's why we've hired them. So as far as Mr. Freudman's tone, which is silly as far as I'm concerned, his question was directed at her performance specifically. Why did she not follow the statute? It's a simple question. It's a simple question. And I'm not sure why it didn't get answered, because I think I still want to know. We have a responsibility to the taxpayers in this town for them to know as well, why people aren't doing their job. It's bottom line. We pay a lot of money to our employees in this town. They get great benefits, and we just expect that they do their job. That's all I have to say.
Mr. Shakin.
Just for the purposes of the public who's watching this meeting, I would like to read from our rules of procedure, and Rule 5, which is the rule about decorum, says that all meeting participants, including counselors, should confine their remarks to the substance of the issue at hand. Participants should avoid discussing personalities and not impugn the motive, character, or integrity of any individual. When we all are elected to serve on this body, one of the things that happens when we're elected is that we all agree to follow these rules of procedure. If we didn't, we would not be able to function. We wouldn't be able to have a meeting. When a member of the council asks a member of the staff, a professional who's been hired by the town to run a portion of the town government, I'm paraphrase here, tell me why you broke the law. It's my opinion that question could have been asked in a way that did not impugn the motive, or the character of the person in front of us, but instead was asked in a way designed specifically to impugn their motive. And that is why I offer that I support the mayor's decision, which, by the way, is now 2 months ago. This is the first time that any grievance has been heard of it, was correct. Now, to address those grievances, if the mayor makes a ruling as the chair of our body, just as if a committee chair makes a ruling that one of us disagrees with, the person who disagrees with it has a right under our rules of procedure, under Robert's rules, to make a motion to overturn the chair's ruling, at which point we would stop, we would debate the merits of the motion, and we would vote. I would offer that the argument that Councilor Freudman has made this evening, that he made on the phone with the mayor last week, that what he was doing almost 2 months ago now was to question someone's job performance rather than to impugn their motives or their character, that the proper recourse would be to challenge the ruling of the chair, to debate on the merits of his challenge, and to rely on his fellow councilors to see his point of view or not. And that's how these meetings need to operate. If this is a judgment call, the decorum rule is up to the chair to interpret, and it's up to us as a body to say, yes, we agree with that interpretation, or no, we don't. That was not a challenge, wasn't made. And it, as far as I know, is not being officially made now. I don't know if it even could be outside of that meeting, but it's interesting to me that we are debating something that happened at the council meeting several months ago. And frankly, I feel like each of us are given a pretty wide latitude on this decorum rule. But only some of us routinely flirt with the boundaries of that latitude. Thank you.
Mr. Shuren.
Maybe to sort of get us out of this for this evening, I just want to renew a request that I made, echoing Councilman Augsburger's request. At some point, if we can fit it into our very busy schedule in the coming months, have a session on Robert's Rules from which we can all get up saying and feeling that we know the rules well enough that we won't have disputes about what they are, what they mean. Yes, they are written down. Yes, it is incumbent on all of us to read them, but there are questions, there are legitimate questions. And sometimes with no bad intent, people violate Robert's Rules without fully understanding them. I think that it would be good for the council to have such a session and to have it once again when there's a new council after election in November.
Mr. Bruder.
I can see the general topic that everyone's comments are focusing around, and I'm going to shift this. My twins who are at Southeast wanted me to make sure that everyone knew that tomorrow was going to be a snow day in Mansfield and that you'll be doing remote learning. So, I mean, we're looking forward to doing the communications that are not really great. Makes it really come home with everything. So just really appreciate everything that the Board of Ed and everyone else is doing.
Thank you, Mr. Bruder. Mr. Freudman, this is a report and comment from counselors. It really isn't an opportunity to rehash old issues. I'll give you a minute to speak, but I think we need to move on after that.
Okay, that's fine. I don't need much time. With respect to Mr. Shuren, a workshop on Robert's Rules doesn't apply here. This is a matter of interpreting the town council rules of procedure. And secondly, to Deputy Mayor Shakin's comment that I guess he's referring to me, flirt with violating Rule 5, I refute that. Look, that the members of the majority party are not inclined to provide oversight over the executive branch, that's their prerogative. But we see that we in the minority party see that as a key function of the legislative body, of any legislative body, federal, state, or local. And that's what we do. I have never impugned someone's character or motives or integrity. And Councilor Berthelot suggested that I had done that with the superintendent. I didn't say that, that she intentionally violated any laws. I simply said this was the statute. You knew the statute. Why didn't you follow it? I think that's almost verbatim. And I think that's a performance question. I did not say it in a caustic way. I said it kind of in an even tone, like I'm speaking now. So I just think the mayor did not want the I don't know why the mayor thought the.
Mr. Redmond, your minute is up. Your minute is up.
And one more thing,
Mr. Redmond, I have been watching the second hand on my watch. I gave you a minute, and your minute is up. So we are now going to move on, unless anyone else has a report or comment to make. I don't want to you have been heard. You have spoken. You have been heard. The next item on our agenda is old business, and it is the report on COVID. Somebody's got a phone on and we're getting an echo again. So I would like to welcome Mr. Miller. Are you here?
I am. Can you see me and hear me?
Where are you? You're not on my, there you are. Sorry.
We can see and hear you, Rob.
Okay.
Yes,
great.
please.
So thank you, Madam Mayor, for inviting me here again tonight. I have a few COVID items to review with council. Just starting off, generally speaking, with some of the surveillance data. The state of Connecticut has been trending down in a number of important indicators. One of the most important is hospitalizations. Connecticut's been under 1,000 now for a bit, which is a real positive news. Also, the positivity rate is under 5% and actually now under 4%. Again, that's positive news. For our part here in Eastern Connecticut, we were trending up there for a period of time, but now have kind of plateaued. And for some of the communities, they too have, Eastern Connecticut, start to trend down too, along with the rest of the state. So generally speaking, the surveillance data and the indicators continue to go in the right direction. Hopefully that continues. I know that there's some questions about the potential impact of variants come perhaps sometime in March and April, but it remains to be seen exactly what the impact of that will be. In terms of testing briefly, Mansfield weekly testing at the middle school continues. The last numbers I have were from February 3rd. 46 specimens were collected. 146 were collected. 143 of them were negative, and 3 were pending at the time that I was able to get this. Even if assuming those were all 3 positive, it would be about a 2% positivity rate. But last I had that they were pending. I do want to spend a bit of time talking about the vaccine rollout. The Eastern Highlands Health District, as of today, has administered approximately 1,700 first doses, 300 second doses, for a total of about 2,000 doses. We're doing about 400 doses a week. We're now that we're doing second doses also, we've had to reduce the throughput for first doses to accommodate needed capacity to manage the second doses. So it's split 200 first doses a week and 200 second doses a week for 400. As of February 3rd, in terms of coverage for vaccine, for those 75 and older, Mansfield was at 55.5%, which is better than the state average for the same period, 43.2%. This is as of the 3rd. It's a few days later, so I'm sure those numbers continue to increase. Of that 564 count, the health district administered about 110 of those, and in total of the 1,700 we've done, first dose is about 230 are for Mansfield residents over that period. We continue to. I did meet with the University of Connecticut officials a little over a week ago now. I did learn that UConn Health in the private physician's office next to the urgent care center in Stores downtown is doing about 160 doses a week to other patients or others who can sign up through the website or their call-in center for UConn Health Healthcare Network. We did also discuss the prospect of very early discussion about the prospect of a joint community and UConn mass vaccination site. So hopefully there'll be more to come on that sometime in the future. In terms of other providers in the area, in the local area, the only other one locally, UConn, Hartford Healthcare, I believe, is doing some at Abacus Hospital, regular clinics, and then Generations at Willimantic also is administering a vaccine primarily to their own patients. And they are, as a federally qualified health center, has been trying to focus on some of the vulnerable populations, particularly in the conjugate settings and shelters of that nature. For those of you who had heard that the governor's press conference today, he has announced the formal rollout of 65 plus population starting Thursday, the 11th. For our part at Eastern Highlands, we did receive a communication allowing us, if we had available appointments for clinics leading up to that Thursday, to open them up to 65 plus personnel, which we did. We had available appointments, and so we opened them up and did that. And as you might, as is kind of part parcel to any kind of transition from one phase to the other, you get a soft launch, and with a soft launch, it's kind of disjointed access to various providers for vaccine. I was able to connect directly with our municipal partners and the school districts, and able to communicate to them that if they wanted to put their employees' names who are eligible in that age group, they could, and they could book appointments with our clinics and our open appointments, which they did. So we were happy to be able to accommodate that early access to our public sector employees in the area. Let's see. I know that I know that also there's interest in the outreach to seniors in the community. I frankly haven't been really taking the lead in that. I've been supporting it certainly through Pat's and Mr. Aylesworth's office. I don't know, Ryan, if you wanted to speak to that point or if you want me to take a stab at it.
Yeah, I know you're having some difficulty connecting at the front end, Rob. I'm not sure exactly when you joined. I did provide a brief overview of where we were in terms of phone calls, and I referenced the code red, the reverse 911.
Okay, great.
We're going to be deploying in the next day or so. So unless there's anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I don't think so. So that would conclude my report. Be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Katzenberger.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the report. I'm not sure if you would, actually have access to this information, but do you know, have residents who are eligible for the vaccine, but have, for whatever reason, chosen not to get it? Do you know why? Have they communicated to you? Is it scheduling issues? Is it an objection or concern about health reasons? Or, we have as you noted, a very good rate, but still people who eligible and clearly not obtaining it for their own on their own.
We have not had that many opportunities to kind of query or engage residents on that matter. Certainly, with certainly, I mean, it's easy to speculate with respect to some of the elderly in our communities are obviously challenged either through kind of the digital environment or through mobility issues and transportation issues. I'm sure that that is certainly a component. How much of a factor, say, a vaccine hesitancy plays in this matter? In that age group, it's frankly hard for me to say. I know that the state is pushing out messaging, and the health district will soon dovetail on that to kind of offset what may be some vaccine hesitancy out there in the community. But I couldn't say for sure exactly what's going on in that regard.
Thank you. Mayor, I had a follow-up question, but can certainly wait.
Go right ahead.
How concerned are you, or do you think that, in terms of, nationwide, there's a fair amount of misinformation about the vaccine, some deliberately misinformed or simply frauding on information, incorrect information, others actually, well-meaning but not accurate. Do you have a sense of how important that is in suppressing our vaccine?
Well, I am concerned with regards to some of the anti-vax community, which is out there. There was an organized effort among the anti-vax community about 2 months ago, I believe it was, or maybe it was 6 weeks ago, just before we were starting to roll out. A series of very large banners had been posted, had been hung across a number of interstates in various places around the state. The closest of which was here in Route 384. I believe it was in Killingly somewhere, but I can't say for sure. And it's been frustrating to see that kind of messaging going out, working directly against our efforts at local and state public health to try to get people vaccinated and quell the rates of morbidity, mortality that come with this disease. Vaccine is very much a big part of that. And when you see a group out there in a concerted, organized effort to undermine that, it's disconcerting. And so we're anticipating more of that. It's hard to say exactly when and what form it will take. I know that in the past there have been small protests at various vaccine sites. Those are more related to the seasonal flu. I'm not aware of anything organized in terms of the COVID vaccination clinic sites, but it does certainly create a challenge when you're trying to get messaging out which supports and promotes people to get vaccinated for all the right reasons.
Thank you.
Mr. Shaken.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for being responsive earlier today. When I asked you some questions about how the update in Ryan's report, my first question is, can you confirm that the health district has or does not have available appointments on Wednesday and then more broadly this week still?
Mm-hmm. They are all full.
They're all full. Okay, so Wednesday is now full?
Yes.
Great, that's good to hear. So I just wanted to say for the public who might be watching, you are now able to register yourself if you're between 65 and 74 as of this morning. And so I would encourage you to do that. If you haven't already, and just Google, the easiest way is probably to just Google CTDPHVAMS and fill out the form. It can take a couple hours for the system to let you in. It can be a couple hours or a couple days, but that's how you start registering for appointments with Rob's crew, who's doing weekly clinics at E.O. Smith and elsewhere. And then you can also go through your healthcare provider, go through MyChart Plus and do all that fun stuff. But it's open now for people who are 65 or over, and anyone in town who's been anxiously waiting, I would encourage you to, as soon as you possibly can, to do that. I have a question about the outreach that was talked about. I have a visitor now. We're gonna have to move. We have been obviously focusing on folks who are 75 plus, and a large portion of our focus has been on the technology piece and helping people navigate this somewhat unfortunately complicated technological process. As we get closer to exhausting that group and start working on people who may have better access to technology and better technology literacy, are there sort of plans to shift that outreach into trying to get to some of the underrepresented populations that live in town? We know people who, for lack of a prettier way of putting this demographically, are wealthy and white, are having great access to the vaccine, and people who are non-wealthy and non-white are getting vaccinated at substantially lower rates, and requiring a fair bit of outreach from local institutions. So I'm curious if that's in the cards as we, have a few hundred people who are over 75 left in town to get to, and are just sort of standing up this big outreach program.
I'll tackle that, Ben. So I can say that while I wouldn't go as far as saying that we've developed what I would consider to be the final strategy to address that very issue, I can say that it has been discussed that that the target group up till today, well, obviously we had 65 to 74-year-olds now, but up to this point, the 75 plus cohort, the issue has been, a little less identifying these folks and making sure they were aware, and more helping them navigate, the technology, as you said, digital literacy, so to speak. It was definitely, or has been, a challenge. And to your point, as we move on into new age ranges, the challenge will be less that navigating the digital environment, and more making sure that all members of our community, including those that don't have access to a lot of the communication media that we use, that they're being reached. And so I'm not prepared to say that we have the answer to that question, but it is very much on top of mind, and it's something that's being discussed, and certainly something that we're actively trying to address.
Thanks. I had a non-vaccine related questions as my last one. Forgive me, I'm trying to pull it up in front of me here. In the town manager's report, you included the last Eastern Highlands Health District report, which included case numbers for Mansfield. Am I reading them correctly here, that in the last 2 weeks, there have been, in last week, 153 new COVID cases, in the 2 weeks, 101, and that of those, 40 and 93 were not UConn students?
That's how I would interpret it. Yes.
That's correct.
So just to be clear, what we experienced in the fall is very much the opposite is happening right now, which
That's
is
correct.
In the fall, UConn students were by far the vast majority of our prevalence, and now they are the vast minority that, in fact, most COVID in Mansfield is happening outside of the university community.
Great. Like 80 or 90% non-university.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a totally different question. You've done a pretty good job of reaching people who are 75 and older, even if you called some of us in on a Friday night to take one of the 6 last remaining doses. I was on VAMS. I actually had an appointment early February, which I canceled as a result of having the benefit of your overload. But that raises another question, and that is, now we are getting people, including people who are 75 and older, who schedule.
My friend said the same thing. She's like,
Rob, I think we're getting some feedback from your mic.
Sorry about that.
We're getting people who now need to get the second dose. And I will tell you that getting the second dose turns out to be twice as hard as getting the first dose. because every appointment that's listed within a 10-mile radius for as far ahead as you go is filled. Is that correct? Or is that a problem with the website?
Rob, you're muted.
Yes. So let me just say that scheduling the second doses or access to second dose by some patients certainly has been a challenge. For our part at Eastern Highlands, we do create, for every first dose appointment, a corresponding second dose appointment. And there was a transition early in the vaccine campaign that was an artifact of us not really knowing where we're going to be 28 days out in terms of the location of our vaccine clinic. And so it's hard to create appointments in VAMs if you don't know where you're going to be. And so we had a 3 or so weeks into the campaign, we were finally able to secure, as many of you know, a site with the town's cooperation at the community center. And so once we were secured that site, we did send out a blast email to all our patients, encouraging them. We created a number of second dose appointments and encouraged them to fill those appointments. And consequently, I would say 90% of those appointments were filled. Unfortunately, there are some people left out, and so what we're doing now is, as we get calls from those individuals that are our patients, we do have an obligation to accommodate them. So we do work them in on a case-by-case basis to ensure that they do get their second dose within the time frame recommended under the emergency use authorization from the FDA.
Mr. Miller, however, your phone message on somebody calls Eastern Highlands, the message they are receiving is you do not make appointments for vaccines.
So we are getting calls through for second dose appointments, and we are putting those people into a list, and we are getting them in. Your observation that our outgoing message may need to be updated is appreciated, and we can certainly correct that. But moving forward, what we are doing is, with our clinics that we have going now, is every time, and maybe I said this before, but every time a patient comes in for the first dose, we have them make their appointment or facilitate their appointment scheduling at the time for their second dose at the time of their first.
All right, so for people who got a first dose before you were rescheduling on site, how would you suggest that they proceed? Because we have spent hours on the phone with the state's phone numbers in.
If there are patients and they got their first dose with us, they can call our main number at 860-429-3325, and there'll be a menu of calls. And what you can do is, at one point there will be an option for other items. There'll be two options. Either way, we'll get you there. If there is an option for COVID-related items, and they can take that option, or they can go the other way, and it's an other menu item. And both, if they get through the end and they get to a live person, or they get a voicemail message, they can say, "I'm a second dose patient. I would like to schedule a second dose appointment. I've been unable to do so." Alternatively, they can email us at ehhd@ehhd.org, providing the same explanation that they're our patient and that they're challenged by scheduling a second dose, and we will accommodate them. In the interim, Madam Mayor, like I said, appreciate your feedback, and we'll make our outgoing message a bit clearer moving forward.
Thank you. Ms. Berthelot.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, Mr. Miller, thanks for all of the amazing work you all are doing. and for Mansfield being one of doing really well in terms of getting people vaccinated, but we could always do better. And I hope that you're hearing consistently from our town that we want to make this an all hands on deck effort, and that if you're having barriers including things like a place to schedule, that you please think of us first as a resource, because this really matters a lot.
Mhm.
That said, I think the mayor's point about the phone message is really, really important. And I would ask you to consider rearranging the messages such that, because people have a limited time to get vaccinated, that maybe the first thing that they hear is, in the event that you need your second vaccine and you can't find a site, leave a message, rather than we're not taking reservations via this number. So it's really super clear, because we don't want people to slip through the cracks.
Absolutely, totally agree.
And there's one other question about the second dose. Everybody's thinking 3 weeks for the Pfizer and 4 weeks for the Moderna. What happens if you can't schedule until 6 weeks?
So the guidance is the FDA recommendation, the FDA authorization is between 4 and 6 weeks. If it's after 6 weeks, the recommendation is to still get the vaccine. You can still get the second dose.
Is it a problem if you go to 7 weeks?
So the guidance I read, I think the issue is they don't have data on it, so they can't stay, because the clinical trial data really covers that 4 to 6 week period.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Miller? Mr. Freudman.
Yeah, I've been listening to this, and I read the details in the town manager's report. Mr. Miller, I'd just like to know something very basic, since it was mentioned. You mentioned the number again, 429-3225. If I call that number, also it's mentioned they're setting up shots at E.O. Smith, and they're setting up shots, the vaccinations, I should say, over at the senior center on some days, and the high school other days. Bottom line, if I call your number there at the office, will they set up the appointments, or is this just a number that says, well, now you can call this number or go on that website and deal with that maze? Or is your office going to provide the service of setting up the appointments here in town?
For first doses, the answer is no. Our system is set up for online appointments. That's the system. That's a system that we're currently using.
Online through your office?
So second doses, as I said, we're gonna change our outgoing message. We're very much challenged by taking appointments. The system as it's currently set up with the VAMS is predominantly an online appointment making system, and it's the system that the state health department has provided us for use, and which is in part why it's very challenging for seniors who are challenged by the digital world to make appointments.
Well, I'm in that senior category, and you mentioned its website. So if I went to your website, ehhd@ehhd.org,
yep.
Will I be able to set it up through your website?
Yes, because it's linked to the state website where there's an online form to the VAM system to start the process.
What happens at the state website?
There's an online form that you'll be asked to complete, and once you complete that form, then the state will send you a confirmation that you completed the form, and that you can expect an email at some point in time from vams.cdc.gov providing further instructions on how to register and schedule your appointment in VAMS.
So you register in one place, only to wait to hear back, and then you get sent to another website to set it up.
Yep, I agree. It's not ideal. agree. It's not
No.
ideal.
That's fine. You've answered my question, but I can tell you that for some of us that, not all, there are some very savvy, tech savvy people who are my age and older. But some of us, that we feel shut out of that right off the bat. It's like it's too complicated. Just some people in my age cohort
Sure.
are very
Sure.
internet challenged. So if there isn't a more streamlined way, well, I think some people will give up. That's just an opinion. I don't obviously have data on that, but
Yeah.
no.
No, I agree. It is a challenge for some, and it does pose a barrier to some, no doubt.
Unfortunately, this seems to have been set up by the CDC and with the agreement of the states to do it, and it's very clunky.
Mhm.
Having struggled with it myself. However, people should know that if they are having difficulty, they can call the senior center or the library, and both agencies have staff who will talk them through it, will do a screen share, or will do it in person if necessary. So people who are having difficulty should not let the difficulty put them off from getting the vaccine. They should call the senior center, town human services, or the library for assistance.
And actually, since you teed that up so nicely, Mayor, I was going to say that the individual to call is Yamila Figueroa. She's the outreach coordinator for the senior center. And for the public's benefit, we'll just state right here and now, her direct line is 860-487-9875. Again, that's 860-487-9875. And she's our staff lead right now in actually providing that one-to-one assistance and helping people navigate the registration and scheduling process.
Okay, thank you. Are there any, Mr. Shaken?
Yeah, to echo Councilor Fredman's point, but just to offer that this is something that the federal government set up, and unfortunately, we are stuck with it, and even our state officials are unable to edit the system to make it easier or make more sense. And so folks who are eligible, I just want to encourage you to stick with it, because it is difficult and confusing. The confirmation email that you receive references your employer, even if you are registering yourself, and gives you links that you could contact someone for help in Delaware or Utah and Connecticut. It's very clunky, but it will get you an appointment if you follow the steps, and it will get you an appointment relatively soon, because Rob and his team have stood up a pretty incredible vaccination protocol here in Mansfield to serve the health district. And so just take the help if it's being offered, and as frustrating as it is, get in line as soon as you can.
Okay. Mr. Miller.
If I could just supplement the information regarding access to vaccine that's been stated here tonight. There are other providers that do not use VAMS that do provide telephonic service or appointment by telephone that the Mansfield population can certainly avail itself of. Hartford Healthcare, for example, has an appointment by telephone. And so also 211 has an appointment by telephone feature to various providers in Eastern Connecticut. So I would take advantage of those options for those individuals who are challenged by online registration.
One other.
CVS in Coventry is now taking appointments also, but I believe that is online.
So
The CVS in Coventry.
That's correct.
And Walmart in North Wyndham.
Question.
Mr. Jurin.
Yeah, just are private physicians in and around town getting an allocation of the vials for the vaccine?
Not at this time. I think that Well, I believe a number of them have applied to become a vaccine provider. The state, I believe, is holding them in advance for now until much more vaccine becomes available sometime down the road.
There was a letter in a recent Chronicle, it may have been tonight's Chronicle, from two organizational leaders complaining that family practices are not being adequately included in the distribution networks. So I think there may be some pressure to get vaccines into the hands of your family doctor. Okay, it's 8:12 and I think we need to move on. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. I would add to everybody, you have to be really patient. Stay online for an hour if that's what you have to do. Sooner or later, there will be some kind of assistance. All right. Thank you again, Mr. Miller. And the next item on our agenda is the Mansfield Middle School roof replacement. Now, I serve on this committee, and I will tell you that what the issue here is that we have submitted our resolutions as if this were a single project. It turns out that this project is being funded from two separate pots of money, and so there has to be a separate grant application for the roof replacement and for the photovoltaic system. Even though the state is treating them together, for legal purposes, we have to have separate resolutions. So what you have in front of you is two separate resolutions, which we are required to read aloud in their entirety. So if anybody outside who is listening wishes to take a nap for a couple of minutes, feel free. But if you are deeply committed to understanding the legal ins and outs of bonding, you're going to learn it. So the first item is the on page 15. Let me get there. There's a recommendation. There's a motion on page 15, which deals with the creation of the school building committee, which also needs to have these items treated as two separate things. Mr. Aylesworth, am I missing something in this requirement?
Yeah, so one resolution pertains to the creation of the building committee, you were just starting to say, and then the second resolution, it is one resolution for both projects. It just spells out more clearly that this resolution pertains to two projects as opposed to treating it as one project. And of course, that's the roof and the photovoltaic system. The resolutions that are in the packet, which are quite lengthy, as you alluded to, have been prepared and approved by the town's bond council. And I believe, or I expect that your typical practice is to have a member read the resolution, each resolution in their entirety after the motion is made. But for what it's worth, just to put it out there, once the motion is put on the table, our town clerk would be willing to read the motion, or sorry, read the resolution, each resolution in their entirety. So it's whatever your pleasure. If you want a member to do it, that's certainly fine, or Ms. Shane can do it.
Who would like to move the first motion? Mr. Katzenberger.
I'll move.
You want to read, or do you want Ms. Shane to read it?
I am happy to read it, but whatever.
Right. So
first, I think I should apologize on behalf of the legal profession that we still have this very archaic requirement of reading something that will make no sense unless you see it in text, and even then questionable. But having said that, resolution amending the resolution entitled Resolution Regarding Mansfield Middle School.
Wait a minute, go back. You need move effective February 8th on page 15.
Well, yes,
Yep.
I was going to move effective February 8th, 2021 to adopt the following resolution as required by the Connecticut Office of School Construction and Grants Review relative to the Mansfield Middle School roof replacement and photovoltaic system.
All right, so, is there a second?
Tony, point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Shaken?
This motion is not complete until Mr. Kotcherberger concludes his reading of the resolution. At that point, it would be proper to ask for a second.
All right, Mr. Kotcherberger.
Okay.
17.
Resolution amending the resolution entitled Resolution Regarding Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee to make clear that the Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee is authorized to serve as the building committee for the installation of a photovoltaic, I may not be pronouncing that correctly, photovoltaic system at the middle school. Whereas the resolution entitled Resolution Regarding Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee was approved by the Town Council at its meeting held on March 9th, 2020, the resolution, and whereas the resolution was intended to establish the Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee, the committee, and for the committee to serve as the building committee for the projects at the Mansfield Middle School, comprised of 1, roof replacement, and 2, photovoltaic system installation, the projects. And whereas the Office of School Construction and Grants Review of the State of Connecticut has requested that the committee be clearly identified as the building committee for the project in order to properly process the Board of Education's application to receive grants for the projects. And whereas the Town Council wishes to amend the resolution in order to make clear that the Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee is appointed to serve as the building committee for the roof replacement and photovoltaic system installation. Therefore, be it resolved that the resolution entitled Resolution Regarding Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee is amended to read as follows. Resolution regarding Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee. Whereas the Mansfield Board of Education has requested that the Town Council of the Town of Mansfield establish a building committee to replace the roof and install a photovoltaic system at the Mansfield Middle School. And whereas the Town Council is authorized to appoint a building committee for building and construction projects and to authorize said building committee to prepare schematic drawings and outline specifications for each of the projects, construct the projects, to contract with contractors and others on behalf of the town for the projects, and to approve design and construction expenditures should the referendum be approved. And whereas the Town Council anticipates placing a referendum before the voters of the town of Mansfield to be held at the regular November municipal election, now therefore be it resolved that Section 1, Establishment Duties. The school building committee established by resolution of the Town Council on February 24th, 2020, shall be known as the Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee, the building committee. This building committee is hereby confirmed and authorized to serve as the building committee provided for in this resolution. The building committee's duties shall be as follows. A, pre-referendum duties. Plan development. The building committee shall, paren 1, select architectural and or engineering firms to prepare schematic and final plans, including structural plans, professional estimating services, drawings and specifications, cost estimates, and preparation of bid documents and contract documents. The building committee shall oversee negotiations of a contract or contracts to be entered into by the town and said firms subject to the approval of the town attorney and town manager. Paren B, if said referendum is approved, paren 1, complete bid documents and contract documents. The building committee shall submit the final plan to the State Department of Education for approval pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, Section 10-292, paren A. Upon approval by the State Department of Education, the Town Council and the building committee shall put the projects out to bid and award the contracts to the successful bidders in accordance with the town's established bidding procedures. Paren 2. Meet with the architect, general contractor, or construction manager to be certain that they reconcile any differences and agree as to what is required by the final plans, drawings, and specifications, bid documents, and contract documents. The building committee shall oversee the construction contracts to be entered into by the town and said construction firms subject to approval of the town attorney and town manager. Paren 3, determine the schedule and phasing of the planning and construction of each building, including each of the overall projects. C, if said resolution is approved, initiation, continuation, and completion of the construction. The building committee shall, award the architectural contract for administrative services during the construction phase. 2, authorize the start of construction. 3, monitor the construction process to include meetings with the architect, project manager, and construction contractor as necessary to resolve any differences. 4, coordinate communications between the building committee, the Board of Education, the town manager, and town council to keep all parties up to date on developments. 5, consider and promptly act on change orders, making certain that any increase in the project involved in any change order is within the amount appropriated for the projects. 6, monitor the preparation by the architect of a list of items which are not fully completed, punch list, or which require further attention when the architect has certified that the project is substantially complete. The building committee shall make certain that such items are completed properly and promptly. 7, review the certification by the architect that construction has been completed in full compliance with contract documents, or review the list of items which are not yet satisfactorily completed. 8, authorize the release of funds which have been withheld or designate those funds to be withheld pending completion of any unfinished work or for any other appropriate reason. Section 2, structure, membership. The building committee will consist of 5 regular members as set forth in the resolution of February 24th, 2020. The building committee shall designate as chair, vice chair, and secretary. The building committee shall act as a school building committee for the projects pursuant to Connecticut General Statute Section 10-291 and the applicable regulations of the State Department of Education. Members of the committee shall include the mayor or his/her designee, Board of Education chair or her designee, and 3 representative members of the community, including at least 1 member having experience in the building and construction industry. The town manager and superintendent of schools will serve as ex officio members of the committee. The town manager may appoint staff liaisons as he deems appropriate. Section 3, subcommittees. The building committee is authorized to establish subcommittees of the building committee, collectively, the subcommittees, to designate the chair and vice chair of each subcommittee and to fill all vacancies on the subcommittees. The members of each subcommittee shall be members of the building committee. Subcommittee can choose their secretaries. To the extent not provided herein, the building committee shall determine the duties and responsibilities of each subcommittee. Section 4, appointments. Town council shall make appointments by way of separate resolutions. Section 5, administration. The building committee and subcommittee members shall not receive any compensation for their services. Necessary expenses of the building committee and subcommittee shall be included in the cost of the projects. In carrying out their functions, the building committee and subcommittees shall comply with the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act as amended. Section 6, grant applications. The Mansfield Board of Education is authorized and directed to apply for and accept any state grants for the projects and any portions or components thereof, including but not limited to the filing of applications with the State Commissioner of Education, the execution of grant agreements for the projects, and the filing of such documents as may be required to obtain said grants. Section 7, Chief Executive's responsibility for coordination of process. Throughout the planning and construction phase, the town manager shall be responsible for coordinating the process and working with the building committee and/or the designees and making full use of the town staff and appropriate outside services as required. Within the project's budgetary limits, the town manager is authorized to obtain outside services as he deems necessary. Section 8, execution of contracts. The town manager shall execute all contracts entered into by the town for the projects. The town attorney shall review all contracts before they are entered into by the town and shall oversee the execution of such contracts in compliance with appropriate bonding and insurance requirements or other matters to which he may later be required to attest. If appropriate, bond counsel shall be consulted. Section 8 and final section, timeliness. The building committee shall make progress reports on the project to the town council and Board of Education no less than quarterly. That's the end.
Second.
Mr. Shaken seconds. All right. These are proposals which have been structured by council. They are not, I would strongly recommend that no attempt be made to amend them because that would get us into a whole can of worms around legality. I think they are also the kinds of language that is requested by the state construction people. So, is there any discussion on this? Does anybody wish to abstain? Does anybody wish to vote in the negative? All right, then I declare that this motion has been adopted unanimously. The second motion is on page 16. Does somebody want to make the second motion? Mr. Shaken.
Thank you, Mayor. I do wish to make the second motion, and I'm happy to read it myself. I will just only hope that my reading of the motion will not be counted against my time speaking towards it, as I do have a lengthy speech in support that will follow. I move effective February 8th, 2021 to adopt the following resolution as required by the Connecticut Office of School Construction and Grants Review relative to the Mansfield Middle School roof replacement system and photovoltaic system. Resolution affirming and restating the resolution entitled Resolution appropriating $2,800,000 for costs with respect to roof replacement and photovoltaic system installation at Mansfield Middle School, and authorizing the issue of bonds and notes to finance the portion of the appropriation not defrayed from grants. To make clear that the authorization is comprised of 1, roof replacement, and 2, photovoltaic system installation. Whereas the resolution entitled Resolution appropriating $2,800,000 for costs with respect to roof replacement and photovoltaic system installation at Mansfield Middle School, and authorizing the issue of bonds and notes to finance the portion of the appropriation not defrayed from grants was approved by the Town Council at its meeting held on August 24th, 2020, and by electors of the town by referendum vote held on November 3rd, 2020, the resolution. And whereas the resolution approved an appropriation and borrowing authorization for projects at Mansfield Middle School, comprised of 1, roof replacement, and 2, photovoltaic system installation, the projects, and whereas the Office of School Construction and Grants Review of the State of Connecticut has requested that the projects be clearly identified in order to properly process the Board of Education's application to receive grants for the projects, the request, and whereas the Town Council wishes to affirm and restate the resolution in order to satisfy the request without changing the contents or specifics of the resolution, therefore be it resolved that the resolution entitled Resolution appropriating $2,800,000 for costs with respect to roof replacement and photovoltaic system installation at Mansfield Middle School, and authorizing the issue of bonds and notes to finance the portion of the appropriation not defrayed from grants is affirmed and restated as follows. Quote, Resolution appropriating $2,800,000 for costs with respect to roof replacement and photovoltaic system installation at Mansfield Middle School, and authorizing the issue of bonds and notes to finance the portion of the resolution not defrayed from grants. Resolved, A, that the town of Mansfield appropriate $2,800,000 for costs related to various improvements to the Mansfield Middle School, consisting of subsection 1, design, construction, and implementation of roof replacement and related work contemplated to include A, replacement of thermoplastic polyethylene, I picked the hard one, roofing installed in 1989 with a new modified bituminous roofing membrane. B, installation of skylights. C, removal and replacement of curbs. D, provision of roof access to the first level of the school. E, installation of proper primary and secondary water drainage. F, addressing roof snow load and snowdrift issues. And G, provision for the installation of photovoltaic systems. And subparagraph 2, design, acquisition, and installation of a new approximately 122 kilowatt DC total system size photovoltaic system to be installed on the roof, contemplated to include A, installation of new photovoltaic panels, associated wiring, conduit disconnects, circuit breakers, and meters, and B, roof structure reinforced as required. The appropriation may be spent for design, construction, demolition, acquisition, and installation costs, preparation of schematic drawings and outline specifications, equipment and materials, architectural, engineering, consultant, and other professional fees, including legal fees, administrative costs, including costs related to the application for and acceptance of grants, the payments of net temporary interest and other financing costs, and other expenses related to the projects or their financing. The Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee shall determine the scope and particulars of the project and may reduce or modify the scope of the projects, and the entire appropriation may be spent on the reduced or modified projects. The town anticipates receiving grants from the state of Connecticut in the estimated amount of approximately $1,902,000 to reimburse in part the eligible costs of the projects and defray in part the appropriation for an estimated net cost to the town approximately $898,000. Subsection B, that the town issue its bonds or notes in amount not to exceed $2,800,000 to finance the appropriation for the projects. The amount of the bonds or notes authorized shall be reduced by the amount of grants received by the town for the projects to the extent that such grants are not separately appropriated to pay additional project costs. The bonds or notes shall be issued pursuant to Section 7-369 and 10-289 of the General Statutes of Connecticut, revision of 1958, as amended, and any other enabling acts. The bonds or notes shall be general obligations of the town secured by the irrevocable pledge of the full faith and credit of the town. Subsection C, that the town issue and renew temporary notes from time to time in anticipation of the receipt of the proceeds from the sale of the bonds or notes or the receipt of grants for the projects. The amount of the notes outstanding at any time shall not exceed $2,800,000. The notes shall be issued pursuant to Section 7-378 of the General Statutes of Connecticut, also revision of 1958 as amended. The notes shall be general obligations of the town and shall be secured by the irrevocable pledge of the full faith and credit of the town. The town shall comply with the provisions of Section 7-378A of the General Statutes with respect to any notes that do not mature within the time permitted by said Section 7-378. Halfway through. Subsection D. The town manager, director of finance, and the treasurer, or any two of them, shall sign any bonds, notes, or temporary notes by their manual or facsimile signatures. The law firm of Day Pitney LLP is designated as bond counsel to approve the legality of the bonds, notes, or temporary notes. The town manager, the director of finance, and the treasurer, or any two of them, are authorized to determine the amount, date, interest rates, maturities, redemption provisions, form, and other details of the bonds, notes, or temporary notes. Designate one or more banks or trust companies to be certifying bank, registrar, transfer agent, and paying agent for the bonds, notes, or temporary notes, to provide for the keeping of a record of the bonds, notes, or temporary notes, to designate a municipal advisor to the town in connection with the sale of bonds, notes, or temporary notes, to sell the bonds, notes, or temporary notes at a public or private sale, to deliver the bonds, notes, or temporary notes, and to perform all other acts which are necessary to appropriate to issue the bonds, notes, or temporary notes. E, that the town hereby declares its official intent under federal income tax regulation section 1.150-2 that project costs may be paid from temporary advances of available funds, and that the town reasonably expects to reimburse any such advances from the proceeds of borrowings in an aggregate principal amount not in excess of the amount of borrowing authorized above for the projects. Town manager, the director of finance, and the treasurer, or any two of them, are authorized to amend such declaration of official intent as they deem necessary or advisable, and to bind the town pursuant to such representations and covenants as they deem necessary or advisable in order to maintain the continued exemption from federal income taxation of interest on the bonds, notes, or temporary notes authorized by this request, if issued on a tax-exempt basis, including covenants to pay rebates of investments earnings to the United States in future years. Subparagraph F, that the town manager, the director of finance, and the treasurer, or any two of them, are authorized to make representations and enter into written agreements for the benefit of holders of the bonds, notes, or temporary notes authorized by this resolution to provide secondary market disclosure information, which agreements may include terms as they deem advisable or appropriate in order to comply with applicable laws or rules pertaining to the sale or purchase of such bonds, notes, or temporary notes. Subsection G, that the Mansfield Middle School Roof Building Committee is authorized to act as a school building committee for and to carry out the projects and is vested with the following powers and duties. 1, to recommend the approval of design and construction expenditures for the projects pursuant to project contracts entered into by the town in accordance with its procurement regulations, including without limitation the costs of preparation of schematic drawings and outline specifications for the projects. And 2, to exercise such other powers as are necessary or appropriate to complete the projects. Necessary expenses of the committee shall be included in the cost of the projects. Subsection H, that the Board of Education is authorized to apply to the Commissioner of Education for and to accept or reject state grants for the projects. The Board of Education is authorized to file notices, and applications with the State Board of Education for the projects, to execute grant agreements for the projects, and to file such documents as may be required by the State Board of Education to obtain grants for the costs of financing the projects, and to take any other actions necessary to obtain such grants or to implement such grant agreements. And finally, subparagraph I, that the town manager, director of finance, the treasurer, the Board of Education, the Mansfield School Building Committee, and other proper officers and officials of the town are authorized to take all other action which is necessary or desirable to complete the projects, and to issue bonds or notes and temporary notes and obtain grants to finance the aforesaid appropriation. Be it further resolved that the resolution is affirmed and remains in full force and effect. Thank you.
Well, the good news is we don't think we're going to spend $2.8 million. So we have authorization, but the actual cost is going to come in substantially lower. My same recommendation is that we do not try to amend this because of the specificity of the requirements of language.
Mayor, do you have a second?
Yes. Do we have a second, Mr. Bruder? Thank you. Comments on the motion? Mr. Shaken, do you have a lengthy speech in defense of the motion?
No, only that I hope we can change the state law. This is kind of ridiculous.
Okay. Does anybody else wish to speak to the motion? Does anybody wish to abstain? Does anybody wish to vote in the negative? Hearing no objection to the motion, I rule that it has been adopted unanimously. Thank you, our lecturers, readers. The next item on the agenda is the invasive species grant. Those of you who've been on for a while remember that we have funded eradication efforts for several years now, jointly with Coventry. Mr. Aylesworth, you want to speak to this proposal?
I'm going to speak briefly, but since Mrs. Kaufman is on, I'm going to give her the benefit of, since she's hung in there through the reading of two lengthy resolutions, to get a little bit of airtime. So yes, this is an aquatic invasive species grant, specifically to develop a long-term management strategy and awareness campaign to control fanwort in Eagleville Lake. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Kaufman to fill in the particulars.
Yes, good evening. So yeah, the grant is very straightforward. We have been working with Coventry for basically since 2012, and we've done active work since 2015 to control fanwort. And in your packet, you have an example, just a fact sheet about what fanwort is and what it actually looks like in the lake. And you can see that it's not very fun to paddle or do any other recreation if there is a large presence of fanwort. So basically what we're doing is we're looking to just take a step back, review all of the data from the past 5 years, and do a community outreach campaign as well as a signage program. And this is meets the criteria for the grant. So hopefully we will get funded for this. And that's basically it.
I might only just add, I was just going to also add that as far as the financial commitment, the total project cost is a little over $9,000, $9,357 to be exact. There is a 25% match requirement, so just under $7,000 would come from the state, but the remaining $2,400 and change will be provided entirely in-kind donation of time and talent from the towns of Mansfield and Coventry municipal employees.
And the consultant that we're working with has agreed to put some money in to do a free workshop. So,
okay, Mr. Bruder?
If there's no questions, I'd like to make the motion. I move effective February 8th, 2021, to authorize the town manager to submit a grant application to CT DEEP with the town of Coventry for the development of a long-term strategy for controlling fanwort in Eagleville Lake, and if said grant application is approved, to accept said grant on behalf of the town and to act as the authorized representative of the town and execute any agreement or contract relative to said project.
Is there a second? Mr. Shaken seconds. Discussion of the motion.
I could just briefly say that I've been reading in the Chronicle how Coventry's been taking it seriously. I'm glad to see that Mansfield is as well, because it is not fun to enjoy the water with that Van Wert in there.
Just one point of order, that the Mansfield is the applicant, and we are going to be collaborating with Coventry, but we are the prime applicant.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'll just add a very brief one. Mansfield Hollow Lake is loaded with this stuff, and it is extraordinarily unpleasant. I don't know, when you have it in one part of town, I don't know how you control it in another, particularly if people go from one place to the other, but this will be, I'm looking forward to seeing what can be done, because this is really ugly stuff. Okay, is there anybody who wishes to speak further? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative? Then I will rule that this has been adopted unanimously. Thank you. I think this might also have been something that could have gone on the consent agenda if we had such a thing.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Jennifer.
The next item on our agenda is a report from Sergeant Timmy on campus activity during the fall.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good evening. Good evening. I'm just going to run down the stats for the fall. Just so you know the parameters as far as where the stats came from. Excuse me. They're from August 14th right to December 31st of 2020. So in that time period, broke it down each month in the stat sheet to give each month their stats for different patrol checks, disturbances that we responded to, nuisance tickets. Those are the town nuisance tickets that were issued, and then the governor's executive order violations. And during that time, just to go through the totals, I'm not going to go through for time purposes. I'm not going to go through each month, but total wise, we ended up with 12,606 patrol checks in town. Responded to 62 different disturbances, all loud noise complaint, party type disturbance complaints. Issued 20 town nuisance violation tickets, and 16 of the governor's executive order violation tickets, which were the $500 tickets for hosting parties.
Were those, how many individual events were the violations of executive orders?
Individual events were, out of 16, I would say, I think approximately 12. Because there was multiple events where multiple renters were issued the roommates were issued the governor's executive order, because there's 3 roommates that I know for one particular on certain address, 3 roommates admitted to hosting the 100-person party when the governor's executive order was 10.
Okay, any questions for Sergeant Timmy? Seeing none, I'll proceed to Mr. Newton.
Good evening, everyone. Yeah, just briefly, I had included 4 reports from the fall for the basically the quality of life related ordinances that my department is responsible for. The complaints we received, the blight investigations we did, our overcrowding, and our off-street parking enforcement. There's 4 sheets. There's quite a bit of detail. I certainly will not go through it line by line. If anyone has any questions in general, I'll do my very best to answer that. Numbers obviously compared from the same time frame last year. And what I typically do for these briefings, I will start at August the 15th of the year and run my report through December 30th to kind of catch the semester from when they typically the students would return to town through the end of the year. So that's what those reports encompass. The numbers were down substantially again, I believe, because of the much lower attendance rate at the actual on campus for the fall. So that's why I think the numbers are down from the historic levels that we might see.
These are reports that have no votes attached to them, but does anybody have any questions for Sergeant Timmy or Mr. Ninto? Mr. Freudman.
Thank you. I have no questions for Sergeant Timmy. Thank you, Sergeant. My questions are for Director Ninto.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last year, you issued a report comparable to this one. It was on February 10th of 2020. And I remember asking you a question. It had to do with the off-street parking enforcement. And I asked you if you are doing patrolling or surveilling of rentals, because there were a lot of tickets given at certain addresses that were all student rentals. And I quite remember quite accurately, you looked me in the eye and said, we don't do any patrolling or surveilling. We only enforce parking in response to complaints. So I did a little checking since then. I couldn't do that in time for the February 10th, 2020 meeting. And I just wanted to ask you, just point out a couple of data points I picked up. You had a much more complete report last year on the parking and overcrowding inspections. They were across 8 pages with a lot of field notes from the inspectors. This time it's very truncated. There are no details. They're on pages 45 and 46. So I want to ask you something about last year on just a couple of examples. On page 61, on one of the inspections, the person doing the inspection had prefaced his report. He goes to this address. It's a student rental. I don't know, he sees an extra car, he issues a ticket, but he said while on code patrol. That was on page 61. On page 63, there was another one, and there were more. Now I'm just going to give 2 examples. It said while on patrol. I'd also like to point out a document I was able to get and just read a few lines from it. It actually is an internal policy document from your department. So it's not published much, in the public eye or to the council. And it actually says inspection sweeps. It says inspections will be conducted on a systemic manner. All applicable properties are visited. I'm skipping a few of the words that are, just kind of not relevant. Once that's completed, we start again as necessary. The sweeps will be conducted when UConn and Eastern State University are in session. During the breaks, then it will be based on complaints. So considering what you told me, that you don't do sweeps or patrols or surveillance, and considering this data that I uncovered last year, is there anything you would like to rephrase about your answer when you looked me in the eye and said you don't conduct patrols or surveillance?
No, what I would like to do is, with all due respect, the document I believe you're referring to is our inspection protocol that was vetted by the town attorney back. I believe the date on it is sometime in early 2016. We did have in the beginning, and this was at direction from the Community Quality of Life Committee, and what came out of it when we started doing the overcrowding, I was directed at that time by town manager Matt Hart to come up with a way that we would go to each and every 1, 2, and 3 family rental within the town of Mansfield. So I did take a map. I did divide it up into grids. We did do sweeps of the entire town. And if you read into that protocol, it does say, and I don't have it in front of me, so I may miss a word or two, but what it says is that if at the end of that first time through, we do not believe through our empirical evidence at that point that we will continue those sweeps, that we would not. However, if we have areas, high areas that are where we know there are repeat violations, certainly if we have complaints. So if an inspector's out to do a housing inspection and drives by an area where we've had problems in the past, then certainly it's incumbent upon them, if they're doing their job. Please let me finish, please.
Mr.
My
Freudman,
time is very limited. Leader of the minority party. You've answered my question.
Freudman, Mr. Ninto is speaking. You asked him a question.
The answer could have been just said, you're either doing sweeps or you're not. You just said he does a sweep.
Mr. Freudman, you are out of order. Will you please allow Mr. Ninto to finish his answer to your question?
I have follow-up questions, Madam Mayor, and this is going to...
You did not allow Mr. Ninto to finish. He was still speaking when you interrupted him.
You answered my question.
You are out of order. Mr. Ninto, would you continue with your answer?
Frankly, I was very near the end of what I had to say, and I've lost my train of thought for my final few words, so I do apologize.
May I continue?
Okay, Mr. Freudman.
All right, and really, most of these are just, one or two sentence answers. The protocol called for sweeps. You're doing sweeps, and the notes from the field agents, sometimes some of them are prefaced by while on code patrol. So that is what was actually happening. And you did tell me something else. You said you don't go in response. You're not sweeping or patrolling or surveilling, whatever the word was. It seems like you did, and it's documented. Now I'll move on to something else. In the report last year, which was much more detailed, there were 68 68 site visits involving overcrowding, and there were 84 involving parking inspections. I don't want to talk about the parking inspections, just the one for overcrowding. Overcrowding is a term from a zoning regulation. It strictly refers to occupancy, has nothing to do with cars. That's a PCC regulation. The off-street parking ordinance, that refers to cars, and I've read the ordinance through. It never uses the word overcrowding. Here's my concern. In the report last year, I could tell from the field notes, here you had no field notes this year, that 64 of the 68 overcrowding inspections were just parking. No more than 4 were really for occupancy. Were you checking how many tenants, etc. My concern is that you're that there's been misclassification, counting something as overcrowding, which is an occupancy thing, but it's really parking. So I'd like you to address that, as well as in this year's report, and I did send a request to the town manager today. There are 18 such overcrowding reports on page 45 in this year's report, on our page 45 of tonight's packet. Are those all really for counting the number of tenants, or were they parking also? So those are two questions. Is there a misclassification problem from what I uncovered last year, and has that been remedied? How many of those 18 this year are really are they all overcrowding tenants, occupancy, not parking?
If I could, you're asking a lot of very detailed questions. I can do my best right now to answer them verbally, but certainly if you want to present them to me in writing, I will be more than happy to provide a written response if that's what council and if the town manager direct me to do. Certainly that's what I will do. The way we note things, I dropped that note field out of the report tonight simply because it is a very crowded field. There's a lot of stuff there, and I thought it was too much detail for last year. It's just that simple. That's why it's not there. Certainly, I could run a report tomorrow with those detailed notes. It's not a problem to do that. Well, and Ryan, I'm sorry to interrupt. It basically, if my time, I work for the town manager, and if that's how he would like my time spent, then we'll go to that exercise.
I guess point of clarification or point of order, just to so I'm clear on the council's expectations and past practice. So in a situation where questions were raised, additional information was requested in the time that I served as the town manager in Enfield, New Hampshire, where there was a board of selectmen. Those requests, if there were to be requests, were made by the governing body as a whole, and obviously, I would work with staff to make sure the information was assembled. Is it this council's practice that requests are made as the council, by the council as a collective, or individual members making such requests a common practice? I'm happy to accommodate either. I just want to know what the past practice has been.
The practice has been somewhat varied. There have been times when individual councilors made requests for detailed and difficult and time-consuming information, and they did not have the support of the whole council, and so the staff was not required to provide that. But there have been other times when requests for further information were supported by consensus by the whole council, or the majority of the council, and those materials were provided. I have a question about the details that Mr. Freudman is requesting. Are there any violations?
Please articulate what I'm done. I have one more question, and then you can speak, obviously, but I have the floor. I just want to say, in response to what you said and what Mr. Aylesworth said, I've done all that. I did it actually through the Freedom of Information Act, and I got the complete file on all the addresses that were visited under overcrowding. And I specifically requested any notes on complaints and what those inspections entailed. So I have the complete file on that, and I assure you, I know what I'm talking about. 64 of those 68 site visits were for parking, and I concluded from that they're being misclassified as overcrowding. I will now move on to my last question. I mean, this is not debatable, okay? I have
a question of fact, please.
I have a question of fact.
I have a question of fact of you. Are you asking for last year or for this year?
I may do it for this year also, like I did last year, and I'll do that through another mechanism. I don't have to discuss that right here. I have one more question for Director Nintown. This is very brief and very direct. On one of the addresses that were visited, ostensibly under overcrowding, but it was just parking, just pictures of cars. That's all it is. So it was one of those so-called overcrowding inspections that were really for parking. One of them was done on September 13th of 2019 at 5 Mountain Road, and it turns out that's an owner-occupied house. Are your inspectors routinely going on private property, taking pictures of cars and their license plates? Because that's what it looks like, and that was an owner-occupied house. Does the ordinance or the regulation, the ordinance on off-street parking allow you to go on owner-occupied property to do this?
We have vetted through both the current town attorney and the previous one that if we see a violation in the course of our duties, we are within our proper procedures to proceed onto the property. If we see something that's not parked where it belongs, we can certainly ticket that. And if we can go to the front door, knock on the door, and basically anything we find in plain sight, plain view from the road, we need to act on. And just
sir, it was owner-occupied. Your office.
Mr. Freudman,
owner-occupied.
Mr. Freudman,
you want. It's owner-occupied. There is no ordinance on that.
Mr. Freudman, you are out of order. Every time you interrupt a staff member in the process of answering your question, I am going to rule you out of order.
You like doing that. You won't answer my question. It was owner-occupied. There's no ordinance covering how many cars.
Mr. Freudman, you are out of order.
May I answer that question?
Please, Mr. Ninto.
It was found after the fact, and I believe there were some convoluted details. If I'm recalling that case correctly, yes, it is owner-occupied, single-family home, I believe. Our regulations do not cover that, but certainly if we have not made a determination or we have a reason to think that it is a rental and under our purview, we'll take appropriate action. As soon as we find we are not within our jurisdiction, we will immediately cease whatever we're doing, and that will be the end of it. And one thing, again, I wish to clarify for the benefit of everyone, the overcrowding and the off-street parking ordinance are two separate and distinct legal documents within the town of Mansfield. We use the parking ordinance was to help cut safety issues in some areas, blighting concerns on some properties, and it had been forever, long before there was a housing department. The zoning agent was using that as a tool, the number of cars repeatedly at a property, to point towards overcrowding. When we moved the overcrowding provisions into the housing code in 2016, that's when that overlap occurred. So we do use, the two of them work hand in hand. And I'm more than happy to take the time anyone would want offline to explain the nuances. Thank you.
All right, I am going to ask members of the council, please, to confine their remarks to the report for the period from August 15th to December 31st of 2020, and really don't want to re-argue cases from past years. Mr. Bruder, followed by Mr. Shaken.
Hi, thank you for putting together the report. And I just, to clarify, because of the tone and tenor that I'm hearing from other counselors, is there any sort of memo or policy that you enforce the rules against one set of residents versus another?
No, I'm not sure I understand completely. What we do have, for the purposes of the report you have tonight, we do have a protocol for what we use to enforce the overcrowding. And again, there is overlap with the off-street parking, which is used as one of the investigatory tools that we have available to us.
Perfect. And you're following that policy? That's what I take.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you for the staff.
Mr. Shaken.
Thank you, Mayor, and I will just beg your indulgence to register my disagreement with your request of counselors having allowed one counselor to delve into significant detail about an item that was on our agenda more than 1 year ago, an item that the public was not aware was going to be discussed tonight because it was not included in our packet, and to cite evidence that that counselor had gathered, but that is not available for the public input and review prior to the meeting. That's a flagrant violation of the Freedom of Information Act and ought not to have been allowed while it was. To the report at hand and in front of us, I just want to state, I don't have a question for Mr. Ninto, but state as a point of fact that the town council and the zoning board have passed these regulations and ordinances the support of the community. That's why they have been passed and not repealed by the town council and in the zoning board. And what Mr. Ninto and his hardworking staff do is enforce the law that has been passed by this legislative body. We are all painfully aware that Mr. Freudman, and frankly only Mr. Freudman, opposes these ordinances. He makes it clear every single time we get one of these reports, but it is wrong, absolutely wrong, for a town councilor to crucify a member of our staff for simply enforcing the law as the town council has passed it. It's what we ask our staff to do, and it's what Mr. Ninto is doing within his duties and obligations legally, based upon advice from our town attorney. So if there's a disagreement about the content of our ordinances, then an attempt on the town council ought to be made to change that content. A motion ought to be made to amend the ordinance.
Point of order.
And to go through our procedure.
Mr. Shaken, Mr. Freudman has raised a point of order.
Yes, I'd like a ruling from the mayor on the following point of order. Councilor Shaken just said that I was assaulting. Well, they used the word crucify. That's awful. for following the rules. I said nothing critical about following the rules. I asked about inconsistencies in the report from last year versus what he told me last year. And I asked about the violation of privacy on owner-occupied land, where he agreed that no ordinance allows them to go on private property.
Mr. Franklin, I've received your point of order, and I'm going to support your point of order in reference to the word crucify.
No, that I did something wrong. I did not attack him on.
No, I am supporting your point of order. Mr. Shaken was out of order in using the word crucify.
The idea was that I was criticizing the enforcement of a rule. I did not do that. I pointed out inconsistency in his report last year from what he told me last year. That's what I'd like a ruling on.
You have raised a point of order saying that Mr. Shaken has mischaracterized you, and I will say that I agree with your point of order to the degree that Mr. Shaken used language which was excessively critical of you, and the word in particular was crucified. So I uphold your point of order, and now we will move on. Mr. Shaken, please refrain from criticizing other council members.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. I think you're correct. The point I'm trying to make is that as the council legislates, we can change our legislation if we decide it's no longer in the best interest of the town. There's a process to do that. And I would encourage my fellow councilors to undertake that process if they believe something is wrong in our book of ordinances, our code, rather than take every advantage on the agenda to sharply question the staff of the town who are only enforcing the law that's on the books. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Sergeant Timmy or Mr. Ninto? All right, I thank you very much for sticking with us and for your report and your good work on behalf of the town. Mr. Aylesworth.
Madam Mayor, I just wanted to make sure, I know we've been at this a while, that we don't overlook the fact that there is one more public safety report from the fire chief.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Mr. Franklin, welcome to the town council. We haven't had you make reports before. And thank you also for hanging in with us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before you, council members, is the monthly incident count for the fall semester. It's a large document. If anyone has any specific questions, I'll do my best to try to answer them.
Does anybody have any questions for Chief Franklin? You got off the hook easy tonight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As always, if anybody has any questions, the office is always open.
Thank you very much. All right, the next item on the agenda is a change to the town council rules of procedure, and this is a recommendation that has come from the somebody's got to mute themselves. That has come from personnel. So Ms. Berthelot, would you please present it?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to put the motion on the table first. Move effective February 8th, 2021, that the town council adopt a consent agenda by altering the current town council rules of procedure at Rule 3B, Agenda of Council Meetings, to read as follows. B, unless altered by a 2/3 vote of the council, the regular order of business shall be as follows. 1, call to order. 2, roll call. 3, approval of the minutes. 4, public hearing and scheduled. 5, opportunity for public to address the council. 6, report of the town manager. 7, reports and comments of council members. 8, consent agenda. In parentheses, it reads, all consent agenda items are considered routine by town council and will be enacted by motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a council member requests an item be removed and considered separately, end parentheses. 9, old business, 10, new business, 11, reports of council committees, 12, departmental and advisory committee reports, 13, petitions, requests, and communications, 14, future agendas, 15, executive session if scheduled, and 16, adjournment.
That's the motion. Now, as I was reading the rules of procedure, I realized that we have a real problem, and I would like to ask, I have shared this with Mr. Shaken, and I've asked him to prepare a motion, an amendment to this motion. Mr. Shaken.
Thank you. I'd like to move to amend the proposed rules of procedure, and this should be in your emails as well as submitted in writing to Sarah Ann. And the amendment is as follows. Move to amend the proposed rules of procedures to strike Rule 4A and replace it with the following. The Town Council welcomes comments from the public. At this time, in accordance with Governor Lamont's Executive Order 7B, as amended from time to time, and social distancing guidelines recommended by the CDC to slow community spread of COVID-19, public comments will be accepted via email or USPS mail or live by phone or virtual platform. Specific instructions for public participation by any of the above means shall be posted at the top of each Town Council agenda.
Is there a second? Ms. Berthelot?
I'll second the amendment, and I also would like to speak to my motion.
Okay, so first you speak to your motion, and then Mr. Shaken will speak.
No.
All right, Mr. Shaken, you want to do the amendment first?
There's an amendment on the table. We need to pass the vote on the amendment before we can speak to the underlying motion. This is a technical correction to the rules of procedure, and it just so happened that it's on our agenda for something more substantive. I'm sure there will be a spirited debate about. When COVID happened and the governor issued Executive Order 7B and we went virtual, we passed this amendment to our rules of procedure to say that at this time no one can public comment unless they are doing it by mail or email, and that's what our existing rules say, that public comment is only by USPS or email. Since then, of course, we've changed our practice in that we accept public comment via phone or via someone coming in live to go to meeting. And so it's a good idea to amend these rules to reflect what we're doing. And rather than be very prescriptive about when things will be posted and how someone ought to log in, I'm just proposing that we reference our agendas, which every agenda per the governor's executive order contains the specific instructions for how someone could participate in the meeting. So again, it's just a technical fix to conform with what we're doing. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Freudman.
Yeah, I understand this is just a technical correction. By the way, I will have an amendment of my own following the vote on this amendment. I'll support this amendment, whether I support the main motion or not. I'm just curious, doesn't the governor's executive order kind of cover situations on this differences in how we do things during the crisis? Otherwise, I see no problem with it. Just wondering if it's necessary, that's all.
Mr. Shaken.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you. Mr. Freudman's correct that the governor's executive order prescribes how all of this should happen, how public participation should happen in public meetings that are virtual. I think even still, it's helpful to have it spelled out in our rules. If a member of the public is wondering how to comment, they could refer to them and get the information. I imagine when all of this ends and we're back in person, whenever that might be, we will have to amend the rules again. Certainly once the governor's executive order expires and we're required to meet in person again, we will have to amend these rules again. But for now, I think it's helpful for them to reflect what we are doing.
Mr. Aylesworth?
I just want to confirm, I believe this is his intent, but just want to make sure that I'm understanding Mr. Shaken's intent, or one of his intents with the amendment. Are you intending to eliminate any sort of deadline, late afternoon or otherwise, for public comment to be made?
Through you, Mayor, no, I am not. I am simply removing the deadline from our rules and putting it on the agenda as it is.
Okay, so it would still exist, it's just on the agenda. Okay, thanks.
It's referring the public to, that's correct, it's referring the public to the agenda for the specific details of how their comment can be received.
Thank you.
Any further discussion of the amendment? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from adopting the amendment? Is there anybody who wishes to oppose the amendment? Hearing no objection, I will rule that the amendment has been adopted unanimously. Now, Mr. Freudman, you have an amendment. You're still muted. There we go.
Thank you. This, just by point of reference, I'll make the motion very soon. It has to do with what you can see on page 71, suggestions I had made 2 weeks ago, where it's my fourth and last suggestion. I'm just putting the fourth one as an amendment, and it's a modification of it. It's not the same, quite the same one. It's not asking for equal time for the whole party. I'll just read them. I'll just read the motion, and if I get a second, I'll ask to speak to it. So, move to add rule. Oh, this is on Rule 8, the one for debate. Okay. Move to add Rule 8E to the Town Council Rules of Procedure as follows: colon, and then E with the closed parentheses. If debate is to be limited, then equal time shall be allocated to each counselor, regardless of the number of times he or she has spoken.
I'll second that.
Would you like to speak to your motion,
Second.
Freudman?
Yes. It's been 3 years. That's really all it's been. It's the second meeting in March of 2018 that a new rule was instituted limiting debate, and it was done in two ways. One was to limit debate to 10 minutes per person. I have no problem with that at all. And the other part was much more ominous for the minority party in particular. It said you could only speak twice. I have been in situations where I may have spoken for a minute. Somebody says something and I respond in debate, and it could be a brief refutation or something like that. And that could take 45 seconds or 30 seconds. And then I've been in situations where somebody takes something and I really need to respond to it. It's almost like they misunderstood what I was saying or misconstrued it. And I wanted to respond. They say, no, you already spoke twice. I find this is very unfair because, you know, a person could speak for 9.5 minutes and it would be no problem. So I'm asking if you would just remove the number of times that you speak part, but keep the rest of what was done in March. I do think if you would approve that, it might go a long way to us feeling on the minority party a little less beleaguered and cornered from what we are now. And I'd suggest it might show some goodwill, because right now, with us being fewer in number, this particular rule on the number of times, rather than just how many minutes a particular member has spoken, has really curtailed us, harmed us in a negative way on the minority party. So I hope you'll consider approving the amendment.
Does anybody else wish to comment? Mr. Shaken.
Thank you, Mayor. Respectfully, I appreciate Mr. Freudman's attempt at offering a constructive change to the rules. I have to unfortunately oppose and ask my colleagues to do the same. This is not a new rule that the council added in 2018. It's simply a beginning to enforce an existing part of Robert's rules. Robert's Rules of Order state that when a motion is on the table, each member of the body has the right to speak for up to 10 minutes, up to 2 times. And that's Robert's Rules of Order. That's how it works. The way our rules of procedure work is that we are governed by Robert's rules unless our rules state otherwise. And so Mr. Freudman's amendment is in order. It would add an otherwise essentially to our rules, an exception to Robert's rules that only we adopted. But I have to say, I think 2 times in 10 minutes is plenty of time for any member of this council to get their point across, and does also have frankly the benefit of allowing us to debate issues without getting into a back and forth between 2 counselors, even when both counselors would very much like to argue with each other. I can say that having been someone who has on occasion wished for a 3rd and 4th bite at the apple. So I appreciate the offering, but I think it would be a wrong addition to our rules, and I urge my colleagues to reject the amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Shuren.
I'm not sure if this amendment is a good idea. I do think that there might be some way, and I do not know what it is, to allow for clarification when there is a misunderstanding or a need for a council member who believes he's been misinterpreted to clarify what he has to say. Again, I'm not sure this amendment does that, but maybe we can put our heads together and at some future time think of a way to deal with that.
Thank you. Mr. Freudman, for the 2nd time.
Yeah, I can see you're not going to change it. I'm sorry. I hope you will consider this amendment. I don't believe we used to limit the number of times you could speak. In fact, I don't know. I was on the council for a while when Mayor Betsy Patterson was the mayor. People would discuss things, and at some point we decide, okay, can we vote now? It was, as far as Robert's Rules has many variations, and they're just suggestions on what you might adopt in your assembly. The thing about speaking only twice, I'm sure that exists. It's probably very appropriate in a large assembly like the General Assembly in Hartford. You'll never get out of there if they don't limit somehow, and then maybe one way to tighten things up in a floor debate. It doesn't have to be done, and usually is not done, in small assemblies. The Robert's Rules are an infinite number of variations, and it's how you want to make the rules for your assembly. And I don't believe this was done until it was passed by the council at the 2nd meeting of March in 2018, when Paul Shapiro was the mayor. And we didn't used to have that before. If we did, why would the council majority have passed that motion if it was done for a reason? It wasn't superfluous, like the implication by the deputy mayor that that's a rule and it always existed. It didn't. If it did, it wouldn't have needed that change in March of 2018. I'm just asking you to reverse part of it, just the part on the number of times you speak, but certainly you can keep time when somebody speaks, whether they speak 3 times for 3 minutes or once for 9.5 minutes. What difference does it make? It would, well, I made my point before. I hope you'll consider passing it.
Are we ready to vote on Mr. Freudman's amendment? I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know where it's coming from. Ms. Chain, can you call the roll on this one, please?
Yes. Osberger.
Are we voting on the amendment?
Yes.
Yes.
Berthelot.
No.
Bruder.
No.
Bertoni.
Yes.
Freudman.
Yes.
Kotchenberger.
No.
Moran.
No.
Shuren.
Yes.
Shaken.
No.
Thank you.
the motion fails. Now we're back to the original motion as amended by Mr. Shaken's motion. Ms. Berthelot, would you speak to your motion, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So as you both recall, when he last met us as the interim chair or the interim town manager, the former town manager suggested strongly that we adopt a consent agenda. I'd never heard of a consent agenda, never worked with a consent agenda, but I understood what he was encouraging was a way to have more efficient meetings. So the Personnel Committee asked Mr. Carrington and staff to explain to us what a consent agenda entails and what would be necessary to move to a consent agenda. We had a rather spirited debate about it where Mr. Freudman raised concerns about not being able to move things out of the consent agenda. When we met again a couple months later, and it was on our agenda again, Mr. Shuren drafted a motion that addressed Mr. Freudman's concerns. As you can read, what it says is that if a member of the council wants to move something from the consent agenda to the regular agenda, that all he needs to do or she needs to do is make a request. That said, the hope consent agenda that we won't have to have for things that are more information and less controversy, and thus our meetings on a whole will move more quickly. I hope you will support this because I'm sure we all would like to have efficient use of our time, and that's a good way of doing good government. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to speak to this motion? Mr. Shaken.
Thanks. I think this is a good idea, and I think it's something that we ought to try as an organization, as a body. We haven't really done it in the past, but most of the other town bodies do use a consent agenda. Most other small boards use one to deal with routine matters like the minutes. I just want to state again on the record, I know this has been a concern. This was a concern in the Personnel Committee. There's an item on our agenda later that is a communication from Mr. Freudman about his concerns around this, and that the way that this is crafted, the way I read it, and the way that I expect it will be enforced is if any one counselor just has an item that they wish to discuss or debate or whatever, that they can ask for it to be removed from the consent agenda, and the act of sort of one counselor's objection to inclusion would remove it from the agenda and keep it on the regular agenda. So I think it's a good idea. I think tonight, as an example, while they didn't take a ton of time tonight, we had 4 items that passed unanimously with very little discussion. Could have put them all on a consent agenda and done away with them quicker than they were tonight. And I think that's the case with a lot of meetings. So it's a good idea. It allows us, frankly, to spend our time digging into the issues where there is more fact-finding or disagreement or discussion to be had, and spend less time on issues that are not usually of any public importance, and where the council is in general agreement. So I think it's a good idea and we ought to do it. Thanks.
Does anybody else wish to speak to the amendment, to the motion? Ms. Chain, would you call the roll on this one also?
Yes, Osberger.
No.
Berthelot.
Yes.
Bruder.
Yes.
Frattoni.
No.
Freudman.
No.
Hutchenberger.
Sorry, yes.
Moran.
Yes.
Shuren.
Yes.
Shaken.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the motion has been adopted and there will be a change two changes to our rules of procedure. At our next meeting, we will start by recommending that certain things go onto the consent agenda, and if anybody objects to those recommendations, they can be debated in full. So we'll try it out and see if it works. Mr. Aylesworth.
Just from a procedural standpoint, want to clarify, because I know previous conversation you and I and Ben had, is the intent at this time, as we kind of, with the training wheels, I guess, take the proverbial spin with the consent agenda, that there be an agenda and that items as printed under new business, old business, communications, etc., be moved to a consent agenda at the time of the meeting, as opposed to printing a consent agenda section on the agenda itself.
The first option is what I would prefer, that we experiment with this by having a regular agenda.
Yep.
And as an item comes up for discussion, somebody can move it to the consent agenda, and if anybody objects, it doesn't go.
Okay. So the form of the agenda will look the same as it has looked. Yep. Okay.
Except there will be one entry for consent agenda.
For consent agenda at the end. Yep.
Yep. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the ad hoc committee on drafting an ordinance prohibiting firearms and other deadly weapons in town buildings. And the motion that is on here is on page 67. I have asked Councilors Shaken and Kotchenberger if they would allow their names to be put in the blanks on this motion. But I have neglected to call Mr. Freudman or Mr. Osberger or Mr. Fertoni to ask which one of them would like to be on this committee. Before we make the motion, do any one of you three wish to have your name on this committee? Not Mr. Freudman. And neither. Would you like to be on this, Mr. Osberger? Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. So, Mr. Bruder.
With that, I'd like to make the motion. I move to appoint Councilors Shaken, Shuren, and Osberger to the Ad hoc Ordinance Development Subcommittee relative to the prohibition of firearms and other deadly weapons in town buildings and connecting facilities such as parking lots, which is charged with reviewing the merits of such ordinance, and if the purpose of such ordinance is deemed beneficial, will work directly with the town attorney and town staff as appropriate to prepare a corresponding draft ordinance that is subsequently presented to the town council for formal review and consideration.
Mr. Shuren?
Yeah, I believe Mr. Bruder mentioned my name instead of Mr. Kutchenberger's name.
Oh, I did. I apologize.
So the names are Mr. Shaken as chair, Mr. Kotchenberger, and Mr. Osberger.
Please.
Okay. Is there a second? Ms. Berthelot's hand went up before anybody else's that I could tell. Okay. Mr. Bruder, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, if I could, please. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, other fellow councilors. I just would hope that, us naming this committee so that we can have a transparent and open process as to what kind of ordinance do we want, what kind of language do we want, and it can be done in a more public setting than asking the town manager or the mayor to try to go about it in a more executive way. So with that, I hope that we can have wide support with this.
Mr. Shaken?
Thanks, and I've spoken at a past couple future agenda meetings about this. I'll just say that there will be a lot of opportunity for the public to engage in this through our ordinance process after this committee, and obviously there will be a public engagement portion of this committee's work. I think from a how does the ordinance how is the ordinance written perspective, it ought to likely be fairly simple, but we'll explore those questions with the town attorney and hopefully report back to the council soon should you decide to establish us. So I appreciate the appointment from Mr. Bruder, and I look forward to getting to work quickly. So if this passes, Charlie and Peter look forward to trying to schedule a meeting very soon. Thanks.
Mr. Osberger?
Ben, you have my email address to get a hold of me, right, for scheduling? Excellent, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion of the motion to create an ordinance subcommittee? Is there anybody who wishes to abstain from this motion? Is there anybody who wishes to vote in the negative? Then I declare that the motion has been adopted unanimously, and I wish the subcommittee well. This is a complicated subject. It will be controversial, but we will endeavor to involve as much public comment as possible and to come to some sort of a conclusion. All right, the next item on the agenda is, I think I got all the way back to the top. Council committees. Has any committee met since our last meeting? Or have a report? Mr. Kachenberger.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Finance Committee, we canceled the meeting for today, so we have not met since the last time.
Okay. Any comments on department, Mr. Bruder?
Hi, Mayor. Thank you. I was just going to point out that the Ad Hoc Committee on Affordable Housing will be meeting Wednesday at 6:30.
Okay. Departmental and Advisory Committee reports. Has anybody looked at those? Have any comments? Petitions, requests, and communications is, you see there, Mr. Aylesworth has provided some testimony on a couple of bills. We have Mr. Freudman's memo on the rules of procedure, congratulatory letter from student government on naming the second Monday Indigenous Peoples Day, some other communications regarding that decision, the newsletter, and a press release from the Department of Public Health about a phone line. Is there any comment on any of these? All right, does anybody have anything for future agendas? Mr. Kachenberger.
Well, I think I agree with Councilor Cern's comments, requests about scheduling, presumably not during one of the scheduled town council meetings, but a request for session on Robert's rules. And I think we should put that, we should go ahead and schedule on that.
May I suggest that the session on Robert's rules be held for staff and for other committees as well, just in so that we can attend as individuals without running the risk of having a majority of the council present and then triggering FOI stuff. It won't be, it won't be a mandatory meeting. It will be volunteer, and we can extend it to other people who might benefit from this.
I think extending it makes a lot of sense. I think it probably would be a public meeting, subject and, available for people to view. And that's fine.
But we'll have to figure out what the rules are. But I just don't want it to turn out to be a council meeting, a formal council meeting for which we have to do all the things we have to do. All right, anything else for future agendas? Mr. Aylesworth?
Yeah, I just want to take the opportunity to ask council members. There's been a request made by at least one member expressed interest in what I guess we could call a municipal finance primer, whatever your fancy. Topics of interest appear to be MERS, the pilot program, use of contingency funds, and perhaps OPEB. I'm aware that at the beginning of a new council, when new members are seated, that there's an orientation that's been provided, and one of those items is a finance sort of broad brush overview, 30,000 foot level, I guess you could say, content. I did share the council members' interest in this with both the mayor and the deputy mayor, and it was their feeling that doing a group sort of orientation or brush up might not be the best use of time, but I would welcome feedback from other members of the council to know if you're interested in this same primer. We could make arrangements for either resources to be made available individually or a non-quorum gathering or training of some sort as well. So just looking for some feedback on what folks are interested in.
I would suggest that if people have feedback, that you contact Mr. Aylesworth and share your feedback with him.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else for future agendas? The next item on the agenda is a motion to adjourn. Is there such a motion? Ms. Berthelot made it, and Mr. Shuren is seconded. Mr. Osberger, you want a third?
No, I was wondering if anyone had any interest in hearing the outcome of the UConn women's game tonight.
What's the outcome?
The outcome.
The women won by 63 to 59 over South Carolina.
Woo!
Nice.
No, number one got knocked off.
Is there anybody objects to adjourning the meeting? All right, we're adjourned.
Nope.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.
Stay healthy, all. Thank you.
Go UConn.
As well.